When Dr. Chen's face went pale during my routine examination, and he asked in a tight voice who had been treating me before, I casually answered that it was my husband. He's a gynecologist too, I said with pride. But the doctor went completely silent. He set down his instruments with shaking hands and told me I needed emergency lab work, because what he was seeing inside my body shouldn't be there. His tone made my heart stop with pure dread. My name is Victoria, and I'm 43 years old. Until that Tuesday afternoon in September, I thought I had the perfect marriage. My husband, Dr. Christopher Ashford, wasn't just the man I loved. He was the doctor I trusted with my life. We'd been married for 16 years. He was respected in the medical community, beloved by his patients, and devoted to his work. Or so I believed. For the past 8 months, I'd been suffering. The pain in my lower abdomen came in waves so intense they'd drop me to my knees. My cycles had become a nightmare, irregular, heavy, agonizing. Every month brought a new horror show of cramping and bleeding that left me weak and terrified. But Christopher always reassured me. "It's perimenopause, sweetheart," he'd say, stroking my hair while I doubled over in pain. "Your body's adjusting. This is completely normal for a woman your age. Trust me, I'm a doctor." And I did trust him. God help me, I trusted him completely. The pain got worse over the summer. There were nights I couldn't sleep, mornings I couldn't get out of bed. But Christopher was always there with his medical explanations, his soothing voice, his prescriptions for pain medication that barely touched the agony tearing through my body. When he left town for a medical conference in Boston, something inside me snapped. Maybe it was intuition. Maybe it was desperation. But I decided to see another doctor, just for a second opinion, just to ease my mind. Dr. Chen came highly recommended. His clinic was across town in a newer medical complex I'd never visited before. The waiting room was bright and modern, nothing like Christopher's traditional practice with its dark wood paneling and outdated magazines. I filled out the paperwork, feeling guilty for going behind Christopher's back. He'd be hurt if he knew, I thought. He'd think I didn't trust his medical judgment. But the pain had become unbearable, and something deep in my gut, some primal instinct, was screaming that something was terribly wrong. Dr. Chen was younger than I expected, maybe late 30s, with kind eyes and a gentle manner. He listened carefully as I described my symptoms, nodding and taking notes without interrupting. When I mentioned that my husband was also a gynecologist who'd been treating me for months, something flickered across his face. Not judgment exactly, more like curiosity. "Let's take a look," he said, helping me onto the examination table. The ultrasound started normally. Dr. Chen moved the wand carefully, studying the monitor with professional focus. But then his movements slowed. He adjusted the angle once, twice, 3 times. His jaw tightened. The muscles in his neck went rigid. "Mrs. Ashford," he said quietly, his voice strained in a way that made my blood run cold. "Can you look at this screen for me?" I turned my head, seeing shapes and shadows that meant nothing to my untrained eye. But Dr. Chen's finger pointed to something, a dark, irregular mass that stood out from the surrounding tissue. "That's a foreign object," he said, each word careful and measured. "Based on the imaging, it appears to be an intrauterine device, an IUD, that's been embedded in your uterine wall for quite some time." The words hit me like a physical blow. "An IUD? That's impossible. I've never had an IUD. I would know if someone put something inside my body." Dr. Chen's expression was grim. "These things don't appear spontaneously, Mrs. Ashford. Someone inserted this device, and based on the tissue damage I'm seeing, it's been there for years." I felt the room spin. "But I don't understand." Christopher would have told me. He examines me regularly. He would have seen it. The doctor was quiet for a long moment. Too quiet. When he finally spoke, his voice was gentle but firm. "Mrs. Ashford, I need to run some additional tests. The tissue surrounding this foreign object shows significant inflammatory changes. There are markers that concern me greatly, markers that suggest this device has been causing chronic damage to your reproductive system." He excused himself, leaving me alone on that examination table with my mind racing through impossible scenarios. How could there be something inside me that I didn't know about? How could Christopher not have noticed during all those examinations he'd performed? No, the thought was too terrible to even consider. Dr. Chen returned with a nurse who drew several vials of blood. "I'm running a comprehensive panel," he explained. "Inflammatory markers, tumor markers, everything we need to understand what's happening." When the rapid test results came back 20 minutes later, Dr. Chen's face told me everything before he even spoke. Your inflammatory markers are extremely elevated, he said quietly. Mrs. Ashford, I'm recommending immediate surgical removal of this device. Based on what I'm seeing, every day we wait increases the risk to your health. What kind of risk? I whispered. The kind that could cost you your life if we don't act quickly. The surgery was scheduled for the following morning at County General Hospital. I sat in Dr. Chen's office, clutching the referral papers with trembling hands, while he explained what would happen next. Mrs. Ashford, I need to be direct with you, he said, his eyes meeting mine with uncomfortable intensity. The circumstances under which this device entered your body, without your knowledge or consent, may constitute a criminal act. I'm required by law to report this to the authorities. Criminal act. The words echoed in my head like a nightmare I couldn't wake from. You're saying someone did this to me deliberately? Dr. Chen's silence was answer enough. I drove home in a daze, my mind refusing to accept what seemed impossible. Christopher was my husband. He loved me. He'd held me when I cried, celebrated my successes, supported me through every challenge. The man who kissed me goodbye every morning couldn't possibly have. But who else had access to my body when I was vulnerable? Who else had the medical knowledge and opportunity? That night, Christopher called from Boston. How are you feeling, darling? He asked, his voice warm and concerned. Is the pain any better? I almost told him. The words were right there on the tip of my tongue. I saw another doctor, Christopher. He found something inside me. Something that shouldn't be there. But something stopped me. Some survival instinct I didn't even know I possessed kept my mouth shut. I'm okay, I lied. The medication is helping. When are you coming home? Tomorrow evening. I'll bring you that lavender tea you love from the shop near the hotel. We said our goodbyes, and I hung up feeling like I'd just spoken to a stranger. The surgery took place early the next morning. Dr. Vernon Pierce, a renowned surgical specialist, performed the procedure while Dr. Chen assisted. When I woke in recovery, both doctors were standing beside my bed, their expressions grave. The operation was successful, Dr. Pierce said. But Mrs. Ashford, what we found is deeply troubling. He showed me a sealed container holding a blackened, corroded piece of metal. Even through my post-anesthesia fog, I could see how wrong it looked, the sharp edges, the unnatural shape, the dark coating of biological buildup. This is a copper-7 IUD, Dr. Pierce explained. These devices were banned from use over a decade ago because they were found to cause severe complications, including cancer. Having one in your body for this long. He paused, choosing his words carefully. Mrs. Ashford, we're running additional tests, but I need you to prepare yourself for difficult news. The biopsy results came back 3 days later while I was still in the hospital. Dr. Chen delivered the news himself, sitting beside my bed with a folder of test results. You have cervical dysplasia, grade 3. It's a precancerous condition caused by the prolonged presence of the device. If you hadn't come to see me when you did, we'd likely be dealing with advanced cervical cancer within the next year. I couldn't breathe. Couldn't think. Couldn't process what he was telling me. Someone tried to kill me, I whispered. Dr. Chen didn't deny it. That afternoon, Detective Sarah Morrison arrived at my hospital room. She was a no-nonsense woman in her 50s with sharp eyes that seemed to see right through me. Mrs. Ashford, I need to ask you some difficult questions, she began, pulling out a recorder. Walk me through every time you've been under general anesthesia in the past 10 years. I forced my mind to work through the fog of pain medication and shock. Just once, I said slowly. 9 years ago. I had emergency surgery for a ruptured appendix. And who performed that surgery? My mouth went dry. Christopher did. He insisted. He said I'd get better care at his private surgical center than at the hospital. Detective Morrison made a note. Did anyone else attend that surgery? Nurses? An anesthesiologist? I tried to remember. There was a nurse. Young woman. I can't remember her name. Christopher said she was new to his practice. We'll need to track her down, the detective said. Mrs. Ashford, I have to tell you, what was done to you constitutes aggravated assault, possibly attempted murder, depending on what we can prove about intent. The maximum sentence for this kind of crime is 15 to 20 years in federal prison. 15 to 20 years. For the man I'd loved for 16 years. The man who was supposed to protect me, heal me, cherish me. There's something else, Detective Morrison continued. The device we removed has a serial number. We've traced it to a batch that was supposedly disposed of from your husband's practice 9 years ago. The disposal log shows his signature authorizing the destruction of these banned devices. But instead of destroying them, he'd used one on me. The hospital discharged me on Friday. Christopher was supposed to pick me up, but I called my sister Rachel instead. I couldn't face him yet, not until I knew the full truth. Rachel drove me to her house in the suburbs, asking questions I couldn't answer. I told her I had a minor procedure, but nothing more. How could I explain what was happening when I barely understood it myself? That weekend, while Christopher texted me worried messages asking where I was, Detective Morrison and her team executed a search warrant on our house and Christopher's medical practice. What they found would destroy any remaining hope that this was all some terrible misunderstanding. Detective Morrison called me on Sunday evening. "Mrs. Ashford, you need to come to the station. There are things you need to see." The interrogation room at the police station felt like something from a TV crime drama. Harsh lighting, uncomfortable chairs, one-way mirror on the wall. Detective Morrison spread photographs across the table between us. "We found these on your husband's computer," she said quietly. The first photo showed a young woman, maybe mid-20s, with auburn hair and a bright smile. She was holding a baby. "Her name is Jessica Monroe," the detective explained. "She's a medical assistant at your husband's practice. Have you ever met her?" I shook my head, unable to take my eyes off the photo. "She's the mother of your husband's 2 children. A daughter, Emma, who's now 5 years old, and a son, Lucas, who just turned 3. The words didn't make sense. Christopher and I didn't have children. We'd tried for years after we got married, but I never got pregnant. Christopher had been so supportive, so understanding. He'd said we didn't need children to be happy, that our marriage was enough. Because he already had the children he wanted. With someone else. "There's more," Detective Morrison said, sliding another set of photos toward me. "Bank statements. Property records. Insurance documents." Christopher had been supporting Jessica and their children for years. He'd bought her a house, a beautiful colonial in an expensive neighborhood. He paid for private school for Emma. He'd set up college funds for both kids. All while telling me we couldn't afford to adopt. All while I'd taken a second job to help with our mortgage. All while I'd felt guilty for wanting to be a mother. "We believe Jessica is also a victim here," the detective continued. "She's been cooperating with our investigation. According to her statement, your husband told her you were infertile from birth due to a genetic condition. He said you'd agreed not to have children because of your health issues. Lies. All lies. Jessica had no idea about the IUD or what your husband did to you," Detective Morrison added. "She thought she was in a relationship with a man whose wife couldn't have children. She never knew he deliberately made you infertile." I felt numb. Beyond shock, beyond tears, beyond anything but a cold, hard understanding that the man I'd married was a complete stranger. "Why?" I finally asked. "Why would he do this to me?" Detective Morrison pulled out a folder of printed emails. These were recovered from a deleted folder on his computer. Correspondence between your husband and Jessica dating back 10 years. She slid one particular email toward me. It was dated 9 years ago, right around the time of my appendectomy. "Don't worry, darling," Christopher had written to Jessica. "I've solved the problem permanently. Victoria will never be able to have children now. She'll never question why we're not conceiving, and we're free to build our real family without complications. In a few years, when she's older and less appealing, I'll divorce her. By then, she'll be grateful I stuck around as long as I did." I read those words over and over, each time feeling like I was being stabbed with 1,000 knives. He'd planned this, calculated it, executed it with surgical precision. And for 9 years, he'd watched me suffer, watched me take the pain medication he prescribed knowing it would never help because he was the source of my agony. He'd comforted me through the pain he'd deliberately caused. He'd held me while I cried about our inability to have children, knowing he'd stolen that possibility from me. "Mrs. Ashford." Detective Morrison's voice pulled me back from the edge of complete breakdown. "I know this is overwhelming, but I need to show you one more thing." She opened her laptop and pulled up a video file. "This was recorded at your husband's practice 3 weeks ago. Jessica gave us permission to install a hidden camera after she started having her own suspicions." The video showed Christopher's office. He was sitting at his desk, talking on the phone, his back to the camera. "Yes, Mother, I know," he was saying, his voice heavy with frustration. "Victoria's becoming a problem. She's asking too many questions about her health. I may need to accelerate the timeline. No, the cancer didn't develop like I expected. That device was supposed to cause aggressive tumors by now, but her body's apparently more resilient than anticipated. I know. If she dies of cancer, I inherit everything and there's no divorce settlement. It was the perfect plan. The video ended. I sat in silence, trying to process what I'd just heard. My husband hadn't just sterilized me without consent. He'd deliberately used a cancer-causing device with the intention of killing me. Slowly, painfully, while playing the role of loving, supportive husband. We have enough evidence to arrest him, Detective Morrison said. The question is, are you ready to press charges? I looked at those photos spread across the table. The woman who'd believed she was in love with my husband. The children who looked like Christopher, who had his eyes, his smile. The family he'd built while systematically destroying mine. Yes, I said, my voice surprisingly steady. Arrest him. And make sure he never practices medicine again. They arrested Christopher at his practice on Monday morning. I wasn't there, but Rachel showed me the news footage that evening. Cameras caught him being let out in handcuffs, his face a mask of shock and disbelief. Reporters shouted questions he refused to answer. Dr. Ashford, is it true you implanted a banned device in your wife? Did you have a second family? Were you trying to kill your wife for the insurance money? That last question hit like a punch to the gut. I hadn't even thought about life insurance. But of course, Christopher had insisted we both carry substantial policies. He'd said it was responsible financial planning. It was actually a murder plan with a payout. The story exploded across local news. Respected gynecologist arrested for assault and attempted murder of his wife. Medical community in shock. Calls for investigation into all his patients. My phone wouldn't stop ringing. Friends I hadn't spoken to in years. Colleagues from my old job. Even Christopher's own family, calling to tell me there must be some mistake, that Christopher would never do something like this, that I must be lying or confused. I stopped answering. Jessica Monroe reached out through Detective Morrison. She wanted to meet me. She had things she needed to say. Against my better judgment, I agreed. We met at a coffee shop across town, somewhere neither of us was likely to run into anyone we knew. Jessica looked exhausted, dark circles under her eyes, her hair pulled back in a messy ponytail. She was younger than I'd thought from the photos. 28 years old. Barely more than a kid when Christopher had started his relationship with her. I didn't know, she said before I could even sit down. Mrs. Ashford, I swear to you, I had no idea what he'd done. He told me you were sick, that you couldn't have children because of a genetic disorder. I thought I was helping him find happiness after years in a difficult marriage. I wanted to hate her. God, I wanted to blame her for all of this. But looking at her face, seeing the genuine horror and regret there, I couldn't. How did it start? I asked. Jessica's hands shook as she wrapped them around her coffee cup. I was 20 when I started working at his practice. Fresh out of medical assistant training, no experience, desperate for a job. Christopher was kind to me, mentoring me, teaching me. I thought he was just being a good boss. And then he started staying late when I was closing up the office. We'd talk for hours. He told me about his marriage, how you'd grown apart, how you didn't want the same things anymore. He said you'd agreed to an open relationship, but wanted to keep up appearances publicly. Classic manipulation. Tell the mistress the wife knows and approves. Tell the wife nothing at all. I fell for him, Jessica continued, her voice breaking. Completely. When I got pregnant with Emma, he was so happy. He said he'd always wanted children, but you couldn't have them. He promised we'd be together officially once his career was more established, once the timing was right. But the timing was never right, I said. Never. There was always a reason to wait. A business deal. A medical conference. A patient crisis. I started to suspect he was lying about some things, but I never imagined. She trailed off, tears streaming down her face. He told me he was protecting you, that you were fragile, that the truth would destroy you. I believed him because I wanted to, because I loved him. I felt a strange kinship with this woman who should have been my enemy. We'd both been Christopher's victims, just in different ways. What will you tell your children? I asked. Jessica wiped her eyes. The truth, when they're old enough to understand. For now, I just tell them Daddy made some very bad choices and has to face the consequences. Emma keeps asking when he's coming home. I don't know what to tell her. We sat in silence for a moment, two women whose lives had been destroyed by the same man. I'm testifying against him, Jessica finally said. Detective Morrison said my testimony about what he told me, about how he planned your death, is crucial to the attempted murder charge. I wanted you to know that I'm not protecting him. Not anymore. Thank you, I said, and I meant it. As Jessica gathered her things to leave, she turned back one more time. For what it's worth, Mrs. Ashford, I am truly sorry. If I could go back and change everything, I would. After she left, I sat alone in that coffee shop, thinking about the tangled web Christopher had woven. How many lies had he told? How many people had he manipulated? How many lives had he damaged in pursuit of whatever sick fantasy he'd been living? And the most terrifying question, how many other patients had he hurt? The medical board launched a full investigation into Christopher's practice. Every patient he'd treated in the past decade received notification letters. Dozens came forward with complaints they'd never made before. Unexplained pain, suspicious procedures, diagnoses that didn't quite make sense. 3 women, in particular, had stories that made my blood run cold. Amanda Pierce, 37, had been treated by Christopher for endometriosis. He'd performed 3 surgeries over 5 years, each time saying he needed to remove more tissue. But when Amanda got a second opinion after Christopher's arrest, her new doctor found no evidence of endometriosis at all. Christopher had been performing unnecessary surgeries, billing her insurance company tens of thousands of dollars for procedures she never needed. Melissa Rodriguez, 41, came to Christopher complaining of heavy periods. He'd recommended an immediate hysterectomy, saying she had precancerous cells that required urgent intervention. Melissa, terrified of cancer, agreed. But the pathology report showed completely healthy tissue. Christopher had removed her uterus for no medical reason at all. And then there was Natalie Kim, 29, who'd been trying to get pregnant for 2 years. Christopher was her fertility specialist. He'd run countless tests, prescribed expensive treatments, and told her the problem was her egg quality. After his arrest, Natalie went to another specialist who immediately identified the real issue: a simple hormonal imbalance that could have been corrected with basic medication. Christopher had kept her infertile deliberately, milking her for fertility treatment fees for 2 years. The pattern became clear. Christopher didn't just hurt me. He hurt countless women, using his position of trust and authority to manipulate, defraud, and harm vulnerable patients. The district attorney upgraded the charges. Now Christopher faced not only attempted murder and assault, but also medical fraud, insurance fraud, and multiple counts of medical malpractice. If convicted on all counts, he was looking at 30 years in prison. His lawyer tried to negotiate a plea deal. 15 years in exchange for pleading guilty to the lesser charges and cooperating with ongoing investigations. The DA's office called to ask my opinion. No deal, I said. I want a trial. I want everything he did exposed in open court. Every lie, every manipulation, every patient he hurt. I want the whole world to know exactly who Christopher Ashford really is. Detective Morrison warned me that a trial would be brutal. Christopher's defense team would try to destroy my credibility, paint me as a vindictive wife seeking revenge for his affair. They'd dig into every aspect of my life, looking for anything they could use against me. Let them try, I said. I have nothing to hide. Can Christopher say the same? The trial began on a gray morning in early November. The courthouse was packed with reporters, medical professionals, and Christopher's former patients who'd come to see justice served. I sat in the front row, Rachel beside me for support. Christopher was led in wearing an expensive suit, looking thinner than I remembered, but still carrying himself with that familiar arrogance. When our eyes met across the courtroom, I saw something I'd never seen before in my husband's face: fear. The prosecution's case was methodical and devastating. They started with Dr. Chen, who explained in precise medical terms what he'd found during my examination and why it was impossible for the IUD to have been placed without my knowledge. Dr. Pierce testified about the surgery, showing the jury enlarged photographs of the corroded device they'd removed from my body. Several jurors looked away, their faces pale. The forensic accountant traced Christopher's financial deception. The secret bank accounts, the house he'd bought for Jessica, the thousands of dollars transferred monthly to support his second family, while telling me we couldn't afford to adopt. Jessica took the stand on the 3rd day. She looked terrified, her voice shaking as she read aloud the emails Christopher had sent her, including the one where he discussed making me permanently infertile. The courtroom was absolutely silent except for her trembling voice. Christopher's defense attorney tried to paint Jessica as a scorned mistress seeking revenge, but she held firm under cross-examination. I loved him, she said, tears streaming down her face. I would have done anything for him. But what he did to Mrs. Ashford, what he did to all those other women, that's not love. That's evil. And I won't protect evil anymore, no matter what it costs me. The testimony from Christopher's other victims was equally powerful. Amanda, Melissa, and Natalie each described how they'd trusted their doctor, believed his diagnoses, allowed him to perform procedures they never needed. He stole my fertility, Melissa said from the witness stand, her voice breaking. He took away my chance to have children, and for what? Money. Control? I'll never understand how someone sworn to heal people could deliberately hurt them instead. The prosecution's medical expert explained how the copper-7 IUD worked and why it had been banned. He showed the jury studies proving the devices caused cancer, explained how long-term exposure would have slowly killed me if Dr. Chen hadn't found it. This wasn't a reckless mistake, the expert testified. This was deliberate, calculated harm. Dr. Ashford knew exactly what that device would do to his wife's body. He chose it specifically because it would cause maximum damage while appearing to be a natural illness. When it was the defense's turn, Christopher's lawyers tried everything. They suggested I was mentally unstable, that I'd made up the affair with Jessica out of paranoid delusion. They claimed the IUD might have been placed during a previous medical procedure I'd forgotten about. But their arguments fell apart under the weight of evidence. The emails were real. The financial records were real. The medical records showing Christopher had signed off on disposing of the very device that was later found inside me. Those were real too. And then Christopher made the biggest mistake of his life. Against his lawyer's advice, he insisted on testifying in his own defense. He took the stand on the 8th day of trial, confident and composed. He denied everything, said the emails were taken out of context, claimed Jessica was a disgruntled former employee who'd fabricated evidence, insisted he'd been a devoted husband trying to help his wife through a difficult medical condition. But under cross-examination by the prosecution, everything unraveled. Dr. Ashford, the prosecutor said calmly, you claim you didn't know about the IUD in your wife's body, but you examined her regularly for 9 years. You're a gynecologist. How could you miss something so obvious? Christopher stammered, contradicting himself, changing his story. And these financial records showing you supporting Ms. Monroe and your children with her, are those fabricated too? I was helping an employee in need. It was charity. Charity? You bought her a 4-bedroom house and paid for private kindergarten? That's quite generous charity, doctor. The jury wasn't buying it. I could see it on their faces, the skepticism, the disgust, the growing certainty that they were looking at a guilty man. The prosecution's final witness was me. I took the stand on the 9th day, my heart pounding so hard I thought everyone in the courtroom could hear it. But once I started talking, the fear melted away. I told them everything. Every detail of our marriage. Every lie Christopher had told. Every moment of pain I'd endured while he played the role of concerned husband. I trusted him with my body, I said, looking directly at the jury. I trusted him with my health, my future, my life. And he used that trust as a weapon against me. He didn't just betray our marriage vows. He betrayed every oath he took as a doctor. He weaponized his medical knowledge to slowly kill me while making me think he was helping me. Christopher's lawyer tried to shake my testimony, but I wouldn't be moved. For 9 years, I'd accepted Christopher's gaslighting, his explanations, his lies. Not anymore. Mrs. Ashford, the defense attorney said, his tone dripping with false sympathy. Isn't it possible you simply forgot a medical procedure where the IUD was placed? Memory can be unreliable. No, I said firmly. I would remember someone putting a device inside my body. What I don't remember is giving consent for my husband to sterilize me while I was unconscious during an appendectomy. What I don't remember is agreeing to be slowly poisoned with a cancer-causing device. What I don't remember is saying it was okay for him to build a second family while destroying mine. The defense had no response to that. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. It felt like 6 years. When they filed back into the courtroom, I couldn't read their expressions. Rachel gripped my hand so tightly I lost feeling in my fingers. On the charge of attempted murder in the 1st degree, how do you find the defendant? Guilty. On the charge of aggravated assault, how do you find the defendant? Guilty. On the charges of medical fraud and insurance fraud, how do you find the defendant? Guilty on all counts. Christopher's face went white. His lawyers immediately began preparing motions for appeal, but I barely heard them. All I could focus on was that one word, repeated over and over. Guilty. 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 Sentencing came 2 weeks later. The courtroom was even more packed than during the trial. Every woman Christopher had hurt wanted to be there to see him face consequences. Judge Margaret Harrison was a stern woman in her 60s who'd spent 30 years on the bench. She'd presided over the trial with fierce impartiality, allowing both sides to make their cases. But now, reading Christopher's sentence, I heard steel in her voice. "Dr. Ashford," she began, looking down at him with barely concealed contempt. "In my 3 decades as a judge, I have rarely encountered a betrayal as calculated and cruel as yours. You didn't just harm your wife. You violated every principle of medical ethics, betrayed the trust of dozens of patients, and committed fraud on a massive scale." She detailed his crimes one by one, her voice growing harder with each count. "You deliberately sterilized your wife without her knowledge or consent. You used a banned medical device knowing it would cause her pain, suffering, and potentially cancer. You gaslit her for 9 years, making her believe she was experiencing normal aging when you were actually killing her slowly. You built a second family while systematically destroying your first. And you defrauded your patients, performing unnecessary procedures for financial gain while causing irreparable harm." Christopher stood perfectly still, his face a mask. "For the crime of attempted murder, I sentence you to 20 years in state prison. For aggravated assault, an additional 10 years to run consecutively. For the medical fraud charges, another 5 years. Total sentence, 35 years with no possibility of parole for 20 years. 35 years. Christopher was 51 years old. He'd be 86 before he could even hope for freedom. The judge wasn't finished. "Additionally, your medical license is permanently revoked. You are ordered to pay restitution to all victims in amounts to be determined. And you are required to make a public apology acknowledging your crimes and warning others about medical malpractice." Christopher finally broke. I saw tears running down his face as they led him away in handcuffs. He looked back at me one last time, his expression pleading for something, forgiveness, maybe, or understanding. He got neither from me. Outside the courthouse, reporters surrounded me. Cameras flashed. Microphones were thrust in my face. "Mrs. Ashford, how do you feel about the verdict? Are you satisfied with the sentence? What message do you have for other victims of medical malpractice?" I took a deep breath and spoke directly into the nearest camera. Today, justice was served. But this case should never have happened. Dr. Christopher Ashford betrayed not just me, but every patient who trusted him. He betrayed the medical profession itself. My message to other victims is this: trust your instincts. If something feels wrong with your medical care, get a second opinion. Ask questions. Demand answers. Don't let anyone, even someone you love, convince you to ignore what your body is telling you. Rachel drove me home, not to the house I'd shared with Christopher, but to my new apartment across town. I'd sold our house while Christopher awaited trial, unable to bear living in a place filled with so many lies. That night, I sat on my balcony with a cup of tea, watching the city lights twinkle in the darkness. For the first time in years, maybe the first time since my appendectomy 9 years ago, I felt something close to peace. Christopher was in prison. The truth was public. And I was free. The months after the trial were strange. I was adjusting to a new reality, one where I wasn't married, wasn't in constant pain, wasn't living under the shadow of Christopher's deception. Dr. Chen monitored my recovery closely. The precancerous cells had been caught early enough that treatment was successful. I'd need regular checkups for the rest of my life, but the cancer that should have killed me had been stopped. "You saved my life," I told Dr. Chen during one of my follow-up appointments. He shook his head. "You saved your own life by listening to your instincts and seeking help. I just provided the medical care you deserved from the beginning." Jessica reached out several times during those months. She was seeing a therapist, trying to process her own trauma from the relationship with Christopher. Her daughter Emma was asking questions about why Daddy was gone. Jessica was doing her best to protect her children while being honest about what happened. "I'm thinking of going back to school," she told me over coffee one day. "Getting a degree in nursing. I want to actually help people instead of being part of someone's scheme." "That's a good plan," I said. And I meant it. We'd never be friends. There was too much pain between us for that. But we'd reached an understanding. We were both survivors of the same predator. That created a bond, however uncomfortable. The financial restitution from Christopher's conviction helped me rebuild. The court ordered him to pay back every dollar he'd fraudulently obtained from his victims, plus damages. His assets were seized: the house he'd bought for Jessica, his investment accounts, even his collection of expensive watches. All of it was liquidated and distributed among those he'd harmed. My share was substantial, enough to cover my ongoing medical expenses, and then some. But no amount of money could give me back what Christopher had stolen: my fertility, my trust, 9 years of my life spent in pain and confusion. I used part of the settlement to start a foundation. The Victoria Ashford Patient Advocacy Fund provided free second opinions for women who suspected medical malpractice. We partnered with ethical doctors who volunteered their time to review cases and offer guidance. Within 6 months, we'd helped 12 women discover they'd been misdiagnosed or mistreated. 3 were patients of doctors who'd trained alongside Christopher. The pattern of abuse ran deeper than anyone had realized. Rachel threw herself into helping with the foundation. "You're turning something horrible into something meaningful," she said one evening as we reviewed grant applications. "Christopher wanted to destroy you, but instead, you're helping save other women from men like him." The medical community slowly began to heal too. The state medical board implemented new oversight procedures. Doctors were now required to get second signatures for any major procedures. Patients received clearer information about their rights and how to report concerns. Christopher's case became a cautionary tale in medical schools across the country. Future doctors studied what he'd done as an example of how power and trust could be catastrophically abused. I started dating again, cautiously. It took me a long time to trust anyone, especially anyone in the medical field. But eventually, I met Daniel, a high school English teacher with kind eyes and a gentle sense of humor. He knew my whole story. I was upfront about it from our first date. "I can't imagine what you went through," he said, holding my hand across the dinner table. "But I want you to know, I see your strength. Not just your trauma, but who you became because of it." That meant everything. 2 years after Christopher's conviction, Detective Morrison called me with unexpected news. "Mrs. Ashford, or should I say Ms. Ashford now? We've had a development in the case. Christopher wants to speak with you." My blood went cold. "Why?" "He says he has information about other victims. Cases we don't know about yet. But he'll only discuss it with you directly." Every instinct told me to refuse. I'd moved on, built a new life. The last thing I needed was to see Christopher again, to hear his voice, to risk being pulled back into his web of manipulation. But if there were other women out there who didn't know they'd been harmed, "I'll do it," I said. "But only in a secure facility with you present." The meeting was arranged at the maximum security prison, where Christopher was serving his sentence. Rachel insisted on coming with me, waiting in the visitors' area while I went into the interview room. Christopher looked terrible. Prison had aged him drastically. His hair had gone completely gray. He'd lost at least 30 pounds. The confident, charismatic doctor I'd married was gone, replaced by a broken old man. We sat across from each other, separated by a thick plexiglass barrier. Detective Morrison stood in the corner, her recorder running. "Victoria," Christopher said, his voice hoarse. "Thank you for coming." I said nothing, just stared at him, waiting. "I know you have no reason to listen to me," he continued. "I know nothing I say can undo what I did. But I need you to know I'm sorry. Truly, deeply sorry. You wanted to tell me about other victims," I said coldly, cutting through his attempt at emotional manipulation. "So tell me." Christopher's face crumpled. "There were others. Before you. During my residency, I experimented with medications on patients without their knowledge. I wanted to see if I could control fertility, manipulate hormones, predict outcomes. 3 women became permanently infertile because of what I did to them. They never knew. They thought it was just bad luck." My stomach turned. "Who were they?" He gave me 3 names. Detective Morrison wrote them down, already pulling up case files on her tablet. "And there's something else," Christopher said, his voice dropping to barely a whisper. "The appendectomy. Victoria, you didn't actually need that surgery. The room spun." "What?" "Your appendix was fine. I faked the symptoms. Told you that you had appendicitis when you just had a stomach bug. I needed an opportunity to place the IUD without you knowing, so I created one. I couldn't breathe. Couldn't think. You performed unnecessary surgery on me? You cut into my body when there was nothing wrong." "I'm sorry," he whispered. "God, Victoria, I'm so sorry. I was obsessed with the idea of controlling everything. Of playing God. I convinced myself I was doing research, advancing science. But I was just sick, broken, evil. Detective Morrison stepped forward. Dr. Ashford, this confession opens you up to additional charges. You understand that? I don't care, Christopher said, tears streaming down his face. I deserve every year I got and more. I just needed Victoria to know the full truth. I needed her to understand that none of this was her fault. She didn't miss warning signs. She couldn't have prevented it. I was predatory from the beginning. For years, I'd carried a tiny seed of doubt. Had I been too trusting? Should I have questioned more? Was I somehow complicit in my own victimization by being naive? Christopher's confession, as devastating as it was, also freed me from that doubt. He'd hunted me, targeted me. There was nothing I could have done differently. Is that everything? I asked, my voice steady despite the chaos in my heart. There's one more thing, Christopher said. Jessica. She really didn't know. I manipulated her just as much as I manipulated you. She was 20 years old when I started grooming her. I used my position, my age, my authority. She's a victim too, Victoria. Please don't hate her for what I made her part of. I stood up, ready to leave. But something made me pause. Christopher, answer me honestly. Did you ever actually love me? Was any of it real? He looked at me for a long moment. I don't think I'm capable of love. Not real love. What I felt for you was possession. Control. The satisfaction of having something beautiful that I could manipulate. That's not love, Victoria. That's sickness. It was the most honest thing he'd ever said to me. Goodbye, Christopher, I said. I hope you use the rest of your life to become a better person. But that's no longer my concern. I walked out of that prison and didn't look back. Detective Morrison's team tracked down the 3 women Christopher had mentioned. All 3 had suffered unexplained infertility during their 20s after being treated by Christopher during his residency. They'd spent years and thousands of dollars on fertility treatments that never worked because Christopher had permanently damaged their reproductive systems during routine procedures. The 3 women, Karen, Lisa, and Michelle, joined a civil lawsuit against Christopher and the hospital where he'd done his residency. The case was settled out of court for an undisclosed sum. More importantly, it led to policy changes in teaching hospitals across the country regarding supervision of residents. Christopher received additional charges for the unnecessary appendectomy and his confession to experimenting on patients. His sentence was extended to 45 years. He'd die in prison. I found a strange peace in that certainty. 3 years after the trial, I was invited to speak at a medical ethics conference. The topic: patient advocacy and recognizing medical abuse. Standing at that podium, looking out at hundreds of medical students, residents, and practicing physicians, I felt the final piece of my healing click into place. My husband was a monster, I began. But he was a monster the medical system enabled. He had access to vulnerable patients, minimal oversight, and a culture that rarely questioned the decisions of respected doctors. What happened to me, and to his other victims, should never have been possible. I spoke for 30 minutes, detailing the red flags that should have been caught, the systemic failures that allowed Christopher to operate unchecked for decades, and the changes needed to protect patients. When I finished, the room erupted in applause. But more importantly, dozens of medical students approached me afterward with questions, concerns, and their own stories of witnessing questionable practices during their training. You're making them think, one older physician told me. You're making them question instead of blindly trust. That's going to save lives. That evening, I had dinner with Dr. Chen and Dr. Pierce, the 2 doctors who'd saved my life. We'd become friends over the years, bonded by the strange circumstances that brought us together. I have news, Dr. Chen said, smiling. We've been approved to open a free clinic specifically for women who suspect they've been victims of medical malpractice. We'll provide comprehensive exams, second opinions, and advocacy services. That's incredible, I said. What made this happen? You did, Dr. Pierce said. Your foundation provided the seed money. Your advocacy work brought attention to the issue. And your willingness to speak publicly about what happened gave other women courage to come forward. You turned your trauma into transformation. Later that night, alone in my apartment, I stood in front of the mirror and really looked at myself for the first time in years. I was 46 years old. I had scars, physical ones from the surgeries, emotional ones from the betrayal. I would never have biological children. I would carry the trauma of what Christopher did to me for the rest of my life. But I was also strong. resilient, brave. I had turned my victimization into advocacy. I had helped change laws and policies. I had prevented other women from suffering what I'd suffered. Christopher had tried to destroy me. Instead, he'd forged me into something stronger than I'd ever been before. My phone buzzed with a text from Daniel. Thinking of you. Movie night at my place tomorrow? I promised to make my famous, mediocre lasagna. I smiled. It's a date, but I'm bringing dessert because last time your famous lasagna was actually infamous. His response was immediate. Fair. But in my defense, who knew you could burn lasagna? Apparently me. See you tomorrow. Love you. Love you. Simple words that meant everything because they came without manipulation, without hidden agendas, without poison disguised as care. I'd learned the hard way that trust is precious and fragile. That people we love can hurt us in unimaginable ways. That evil can wear a kind face and speak with a gentle voice. But I'd also learned that healing is possible. That justice, while imperfect, can be achieved. That strength comes not from avoiding trauma, but from surviving it and choosing to help others survive too. 5 years after Christopher's conviction, I stood in the gymnasium of a women's shelter, speaking to a group of survivors of domestic abuse. My foundation had expanded beyond medical malpractice to support all women escaping dangerous relationships. I know many of you are struggling with guilt, I told them. You're wondering if you should have seen the signs earlier. If you should have left sooner. If you somehow caused or deserved what happened to you. I paused, making eye contact with as many women as I could. I'm here to tell you, it wasn't your fault. Abusers are experts at manipulation. They know how to exploit our trust, our love, our hope. They know how to make us doubt ourselves. The fact that you're here, that you survived, that you found the courage to leave, that makes you a warrior. After my speech, a young woman approached me. She couldn't have been more than 25, with haunted eyes that reminded me of my own reflection years ago. My boyfriend is a paramedic, she said quietly. He keeps telling me I'm sick, that I need his help, that no other doctor would understand my condition like he does. But something feels wrong. The medications he gives me make me feel worse, not better. My blood ran cold. History repeating itself. Come with me, I said, guiding her to a quiet corner. I'm going to connect you with Dr. Chen. He'll examine you properly, and we'll figure out what's really going on. 2 weeks later, Dr. Chen confirmed my suspicions. The woman, her name was Amber, had been slowly poisoned with blood pressure medication that was causing the very symptoms her boyfriend then treated with more medication. It was a cycle designed to keep her dependent and sick. We helped Amber file a police report. Her boyfriend was arrested. Another predator stopped before he could cause irreparable damage. You saved my life, Amber told me, crying in my office. No, I said firmly. You saved your own life by trusting your instincts and asking for help. I just showed you the door. You're the one who walked through it. That night, Daniel and I sat on the porch of our new house, the one we'd bought together 6 months ago. We weren't married. Might never be. The institution of marriage still carried too much trauma for me. But we were partners in every way that mattered. Rough day, he asked, handing me a glass of wine. Difficult but good, I said, leaning against him. We helped another woman get away from an abusive relationship. You do important work, he said, kissing the top of my head. We sat in comfortable silence, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. Somewhere, Christopher was in a prison cell, facing another 25 years before parole was even possible. Somewhere, Jessica was raising her children and building a new life. Somewhere, the women we'd helped through the foundation were healing, surviving, thriving. And here I was, scarred but not broken, changed but not destroyed, victimized but not defeated. My phone buzzed with an email. The subject line read, "Thank you from a survivor. Ms. Ashford, you don't know me, but your foundation helped my sister discover that her doctor had been misdiagnosing her for years. She's getting proper treatment now, and her prognosis is good. You saved her life. Thank you for turning your pain into purpose. You're a hero to women everywhere." I wasn't a hero. I was just a survivor who refused to let my trauma be meaningless, who chose to transform pain into advocacy, betrayal into education, victimization into empowerment. Christopher had tried to write my ending. He'd planned for me to slowly sicken and die, never knowing I'd been murdered by the man who promised to love and protect me. But I wrote my own ending instead. And it was beautiful. If you're listening to my story and something resonates, If you feel that flutter of recognition in your gut, that whisper of doubt about your own medical care, your own relationship, your own situation, I need you to hear this. Trust yourself. Your body knows when something is wrong. Your instincts know when you're being manipulated. That small voice that says this doesn't feel right is usually correct. Get second opinions. Ask questions. Demand explanations you understand. Don't let anyone, not your doctor, not your partner, not anyone, convince you that your concerns are invalid. You deserve medical care that heals, not harms. You deserve relationships built on honesty, not deception. You deserve to live without fear, without pain, without someone systematically destroying you while claiming to love you. Thank you for listening to my story. If it resonated with you, please like this video and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I love seeing how far these stories reach. And if you're struggling with a similar situation, please reach out for help. You're not alone. You're never alone. For more stories of survival, justice, and transformation, subscribe to the channel. Remember, your pain has purpose, your voice has power, and your story matters.